The conversation might go something like this. Did you see her dress? Right, I know. I'd never be caught dead wearing that. How did she ever afford it or fit into it? Or on the playground, oh yeah, my old man could take your old man any day. These are the games we play with each other, whether it's on bumper stickers. My child's an honor student. My child graduated cum laude. That's all good, by the way, if you have one. My terrier's smarter than your child who's on the honor roll student. As if these comparison games, and we do it in church too. That person knows the Bible better than me. That person prays better than me. That person hasn't been to church in a long time. As if what we do or how we look, our accomplishments are somehow the foundational piece of how valuable we are in the eyes of God. Nothing could be farther from the truth. And here is Jesus talking to some people who are pretty sure they're pretty righteous. I don't mean like 80s righteous, like flipping a half pipe on a skateboard. I mean, they feel like they're righteous because, they're in church every Sunday. In fact, maybe they're founding members of the congregation they come from. They gave to this year's stewardship campaign. They pray every day. God, I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. Gosh darn it, people like me. And this is who Jesus is speaking to. And again, he's speaking to these folks, not you or me, right? I mean, we would never do that. Of course, we're good. We're good people. We would never, ever presume that we were better than anybody else. Ever. Okay, now that we've established that, we can talk about those other folks. But this is exactly, this parable seems so straightforward. All right, over in this corner, in the royal blue shorts, is the Pharisee. He is weighing in as a person who's talking about how righteous he is. I pray, I fast twice a week. By the way, this guy's an overachiever. Fasting, you were only required by the law to fast once a year on the Day of Atonement. He's doing it twice a week. This is the kind of guy who's going over to shovel the snow from his neighbor's lawn. This is the kind of guy who's a community leader. And if you hear Jesus telling the story, just like last week with the crooked judge and the persistent widow, you're thinking, aha, okay, good guy, tax collector, bad guy. Except parables are tricky. They're like, when I was a kid, I used to play with Transformers, and the tagline of the Transformers is robots in disguise. Well, there's always more than meets the eye. The Pharisee is talking about all the ways he's good, almost as if he's got to teach God or remind God, hey, God, I'm one of your favorites over here. Thank you that I'm not like thieves or liars or cheats or adulterers or this guy over here sharing the roof praying with me. And on the one hand, the Pharisee's right. He is a person who's obedient, who follows God, who tries to live God's life. But did you hear in his prayer, there's no room for God. It's all about me and what I've done, me, myself, and I, everything I've accomplished. But there's nothing for God to teach him because he feels like he's already arrived. In the ancient Near East, there's a story that goes back to Thich Nhat, Zen master. He's visited by a professor from a local university who wants to learn everything he can about how one becomes a Zen master, how one meditates, and thus forth. And so he's going to interview Thich Nhat, and when he comes to sit down for tea and ask him questions, the professor tells him all the degrees he has and all his accomplishments and the things that are happening at the university he's done. And he gives him this laundry list of his profile and resume, and as he's doing so, the Zen master comes and he's pouring tea in his cup. And as he's pouring his cup, the professor goes on, and the cup is getting pretty close to the top, so the professor says, okay, good. And he just keeps pouring. And suddenly the professor gets up because the tea's spilling over off the table onto his lap. He says, "What are you doing? You ruined my pants." And the Zen master says, "I can't teach you a thing unless you empty your cup. You've come to me already full, saying you've got nothing to learn." That's kind of where the Pharisee's at in the story. The tax collector is eyes down on the ground. He's not looking even to the heavens. He recognizes that he needs God's saving graces. That he's messed up more than a time or two. He needs God's mercy and help. Please, God, just hear me. Help me to be a better person. Help me to be more obedient, more gracious. And just when we think it's that straightforward, I want to be more like the humble tax collector and less like the Pharisee, right? Because that's what we do. I want to be like the tax collector. And then all of a sudden we realize that this parable is a trap, like in Star Wars, where Admiral Akbar and the whole rebel fleet comes in the Return of the Jedi. He's like, "It's a trap!" Because as soon as you realize, I want to be the tax collector and not the Pharisee, you become the Pharisee. I want to be him, not him. Oh, isn't that what we were telling the story about in the first place? Yeah, guilty. And by the way, I think most of us none of us like taxes, but we don't think about tax collectors in the way that first century Jewish people did. For Jesus to use the tax collector as a guy who exemplifies God's need for mercy and humility, let me put it to you like this in maybe our own Chicago terms. Chicago was a pretty big place for the mob. When the mob would send their henchmen to the neighborhoods to do protection money and shake down every small business owner, mom and pop shop, and say, "Hey, your monthly payment is due. And oh, by the way, we like those watches. We're going to help ourselves to those and some of those gummies over there. And we like this lamp too. We're going to take that as well." And what are you going to do? These are made men. They're protected. To speak out, there'll be consequences. The tax collectors are collaborators with the enemy, with Rome. Rome protects them. They are Jewish people preying on Jewish people. Yeah, we come to your door, you owe taxes. Oh, and by the way, we like that sheep out there. And if you don't mind, we're going to take that money over there as well for our own pockets. So one might wonder, why, Jesus, why would you use this dirtbag? Because when you hear tax collector and you're a first century person, you think, sleaze. And it happens again and again in Luke's gospel. Just next week, we'll be talking about Zacchaeus, a tax collector, climbing up to the tree so he can see Jesus because he's a shorter person. And when Jesus sees him, he calls him down and says, I don't want to give away too much of next week. You got to come back. But when he says to Zacchaeus, "Hey, Zacchaeus, you and I are going to have dinner tonight at your house." And everybody, there's a big groan and rumble from the crowd of disapproval. Or if you remember in Matthew's gospel, when Jesus calls Levi from his tax collecting booth, he goes to Levi's house to have a meal with him. And the Pharisees and teachers of the law call the disciples over and say, hey, why is your teacher eating with him? Holy people don't eat with people who rip their own people off like parasites. Why isn't your teacher condemning him instead of asking him to join up? Unless Luke's making a point about the kind of God we serve. The way God sees all of us. And this parable is a mirror, a great big mirror to say, hey, be careful before you get too high and mighty in your spiritual britches that you are so certain that you're righteous that you miss God's mercy at work in somebody else. Every time I read this parable, my first reaction is, when I hear about the Pharisees standing off and being like, thank God I'm not like that guy. I think, I know some Pharisees. And then again, I realize it's a Pharisee in me. And that's where Jesus is going with this text. Asking people to have more mercy in their hearts when they think there is none deserved. Because deserve's got nothing to do with it. Earning has nothing to do with it. And yet, that's not the currency with which we live on a daily basis, is it? Oh, this person's prettier. This person's more athletic. This person's more intellectually gifted. And we value ourselves based on how we compare ourselves to others. It's just kind of a natural human thing. Jesus says, don't do that with God. Each and every one of you here, each of one of you beyond these walls, in church or outside of it, sleeping in a home or on the street, black or white, gay or straight, able-bodied or disabled, they are all made in the image of God. One who calls us to be merciful and open, but to remind ourselves that it's not us that accomplishes it. It's God who says, here I am. As we're living in Luke's gospel, let's just take one other example of it. The one you're probably most familiar with. There's two boys. One goes off and just messes up the family name. You know him as a prodigal son, right? Nearly ruins his father's image. By the way, he tells his old man, hey, you're not dead yet, but just give me everything that's coming to me, even though you're still breathing. So I'll pretend like you're dead and go live the fast life however I want. When he comes back, hat in hand, like the tax collector, not sure what he's going to say to his dad, just let me be a servant. I'm not even worthy to be called a son. There's an older brother. Father comes running, hugs his boy who's been estranged, reminds him how much he cares for him. As he brings him into his embrace, he calls a party. He gives the fattened calf. But there's an older brother outside, and he says, I'm not like him. Thank God I'm not like him. I've been obedient. I've been in the fold this whole time. I've done everything you've asked. So that son of yours, it doesn't say he's his brother, that son of yours comes home and you welcome him home with a great hurrah. Well, I'm not in. And the beauty of that parable is we never know. Does the older brother step inside to welcome his brother home? Ever? It's right in line with the same story about the Pharisee and the tax collector. Both of them mirrors. We think of ourselves as a prodigal, but maybe we're the elder brother. I remember I was in my first church, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and young, and probably not as seasoned enough to know when I should keep my mouth shut. Some of the Christian education ministries asked me after church, Pastor, we need to talk to you. Okay. We've got a problem. Okay. We'll call her Susan. That wasn't her name. Susan, you know Susan in high school, junior, 17, dating a kid in the youth group, kind of a sketchy past over here. Yeah, you know, she teaches our third graders in Sunday school. Yeah. She's pregnant, Pastor. Yeah, I know. She's teaching our children. You think that's right? My daughter wouldn't be doing that. My daughter's a good girl. Okay? We don't want her teaching our children. She's a bad moral example. Again, I say I probably should have been a little more seasoned or patient, but being young and Peter-like and impulsive, I said almost like Jesus' mother, Mary, you mean? It probably wasn't the most pastoral thing to say. But you see what I'm getting at. We do this in the church too because we're human. And this story is Jesus saying, hey, as soon as you feel like putting the medals on, as soon as you feel like you've arrived and somebody else hasn't, no matter who the somebody else is or what they've done to deserve your ire, think again. You need God's mercy and humility just as much as that person. It's something we all have to work on. This parable isn't for somebody else. It's for me. And probably for you. Amen.